Breaking news on this Sunday night, 9 victims fatally shot tonight across 4 boroughs in a recent surge of violence in New York City.
Things sure have changed over the past few months. For the most part, the USA was on chill mode. Violent crime in major cities have been going down big time since around the mid-90s. For the past 25 or so years, it's been lots of good news to report on shootings and assaults and other terrible things that terrible people in our country were doing. I mean, even in some of our worst inner cities, things were at least getting better. But not anymore, pal. Things kicked up big time since the spring, and now there's places in our country where it's straight up chaos. Crime is shooting through the roof again, and in some of our worst areas, it's back to where it was 20 years ago. So, sadly, much of the public safety progress we had made is in the rearview mirror. Today, we're going to visit the US cities where, frankly, they've lost control of their populations. It won't be fun. So bust out your riot shields and your tear gas goggles. These are the cities in America that have lost control of their populations. Is that a banana? People killing, robbing, stealing. Our cities are getting bad. We're not as safe as we once were. How can we get back to that? 'Cause things are out of control. Control. You know things are bad in America when even CNN is like, uh-oh. But a web article they put out a little bit ago was pretty poignant in pointing out how bad things have gotten in our major cities. The article talks about how a bunch of major cities have experienced a big spike in shootings and homicides, and the increase in gun violence is going on at a time of law enforcement reforms and budget cuts. Remember, there's been lots of discussion that police reform is needed here in the US. Now, I'm not going to take a side on the police budget issue. I'm just going to report on the facts and look at what's happening on the ground right now in our major cities, which are seemingly out of control. Places like Seattle. Remember Chaz or Chop? It seemed like a good idea. Kinda. Take over a part of downtown and then sit down until you get your way with the legal system. But it didn't go very well. People were getting killed and attacked while the police stood around and watched. They even let the protesters take over the police station, and the mayor of Seattle and some council members endorsed it. Seattle police have been frustrated forever, as they've been told to stand down on enforcing crimes for years now. But this is the icing on the cake. Now, will Seattle ever get back to normal? Businesses are leaving, and so are people who want peace and stability. Out of control. Now, Philadelphia hasn't been stealing the headlines like Seattle and other cities we'll talk about later have. But shooting incidents in Philadelphia are up 57% year over year, and homicides are up 24%. Now, Philadelphia might be responding the opposite way than Seattle has. Philly police have announced they'll be cracking down on hotspots instead of cowering to criminals. This announcement states the cops are going to try to give relief to people suffering from quality of life, and that they're going to try to protect people who simply want to enjoy peace, comfort, and recreation in their own communities. That's refreshing. However, one retired Philly PD officer called the mayor here spineless, saying the Philadelphia Police Department had worked years to reduce crime, and now all that hard work is gone in a matter of weeks. An example?
It has been a violent night across the city of Philadelphia. The number of people shot since last night stands at 21. At least 5 are dead in a span of just 6 hours, according to homicide detectives.
Portland hasn't been under control for ever, making life miserable for police, citizens, and businesses. And then President Trump is sending the military to try to gain control back. So it's rioters, and then extremists, and then cops, and then the military all battling it out here in Portland streets every day. The good guys had quelled the violence somewhat, but now all the extra enforcement's doing is making these people even more upset, like stirring up a hornet's nest. And as of this writing, there's been 54 straight nights of protests in Portland, many of which are not peaceful. Portland police call them riots most of the time. And that's just the crime part. Like Seattle, Portland has a homeless population that's out of control as well. There's 14,000 chronically homeless people here, and that's just the ones they've counted. Portland's alleys are strewn with piles of garbage and trash and needles, and the homelessness here has spiked criminal activity in this once proud city. San Francisco is another city with the homeless crisis. City officials actually cater to the homeless here. The homeless here have rights. They're allowed to poop everywhere, and then they just clean up after them. San Francisco spends hundreds of millions a year on the homeless, It's estimated the city spends about $37,000 a year on each homeless person. Now, there's a lot of hardworking people in San Francisco who would probably like to get their hands on money to help them improve their lives. Now, one good sign is, while other large cities are seeing spikes in violent crimes, San Francisco's violent crimes dropped this year. But look at how much burglaries and thefts have gone up here. Now, San Francisco was already the nation's leader in property crime. Burglaries, larceny, shoplifting, and vandalism. It's getting even worse now, and this city is out of control, people. Nearby Oakland seeing major crime spikes, and in nearby Berkeley, they're planning to cut the police budget by 50%. And cops here are actually going to stop conducting traffic stops, and they're going to rely on citizens like you and me to try to enforce traffic violations. Yes, one day in Berkeley, everyday people are going to be asked to tell you to slow down in traffic. I can only imagine. Down in Los Angeles in the first week of June, the LAPD reported that homicides increased 250% compared to the previous week, and the number of victims who have been shot jumped 56% in the same week. And as a result, police officers all over the country are resigning, or they're retiring, or just not showing up to work. Or they aren't becoming cops to begin with. Police departments all over the nation say it's very difficult recruiting officers right now, and you can understand why, pal. Minneapolis is where the whole protests and defund the police began. We all watched that city burn for days, making it clear the city is out of control of the law. The National Guard went in, and that helped, but looking back, many wondered why city leaders in Minneapolis didn't have a plan in place in case of a civil unrest of this magnitude. And in the end, a 5-mile stretch of Minneapolis sustained extraordinary damage. Seemed like the people in charge, many of whom are relatively new to their positions, had failed to anticipate the intensity of its own population's anger. Out of control. Chicago hasn't been under anyone's control forever, and the city is more out of control now than it has been in the last 20 years. 68 people got shot and 18 died in 1 week alone this summer. So far in 2020, there's been 324 murders, which is a 34% increase from last year, and the highest since a peak in 1996. And shootings are up by 45% in Chicago. Look, it's far more dangerous for an American in Chicago than it is for an American in Afghanistan. That says something, mister. Out of control. Then you have St. Louis. Talk about a lot of senseless violence. St. Louis ranks 9th in the world for murder rates per capita. This chart shows that most in the top 10 are in Mexico. Statistically, St. Louis is almost as violent as Cape Town, South Africa.
Hey Nick, we're almost done now, and you haven't even talked about the city that's most out of control, New York.
You're right, Mappy. We could do a whole video just on the problems New York's having.
It makes me sad, and I'm scared about my safety in America.
Aw, don't worry, Mappy. You can hide in my closet until things calm down, if they ever do. Poor Mappy. I feel so bad. He's so innocent. Mappy's right. Of course we're going to talk about New York City. This city's a hot mess right now. Police officers being attacked with bottles and trash is one thing, but cops here are actually being beaten in the streets. New York City's seen a 44% spike in shootings this year, and there's been 176 murders, which is 23% higher than last year. And as all of this is ramping up, the city voted to eliminate $1 billion from the NYPD budget. There's going to be less police on the streets in New York City now. A lot of that comes from less overtime pay and from pulling the NYPD out of New York's school system and from removing them from duties such as crossing guards. But less cops is less cops. Also, earlier this month, the NYPD disbanded its anti-crime unit, about 600 plainclothes officers whose aggressive tactics in fighting violent crime were often met with controversy. Now, there are some cities which are increasing their police budgets at a time when many larger cities are spinning out of control. Kansas City, Missouri, Houston, Phoenix, and San Diego are the largest cities trying to curb the rise in violence. In San Diego, the police budget was increased by 5%, despite the fact that the city received hundreds of phone calls from residents asking city leaders to cut their police spending or even eliminate it completely. Incidentally, San Diego's mayor, Kevin Faulconer, is the only Republican mayor of any of the cities we've talked about in this entire video. Many of our biggest cities think they can survive with progressive enforcement policies. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. People killing, robbing, stealing. Our cities are getting bad. We're not as safe as we once were. How can we get back to that? 'Cause things are out of control. control. It's so bad. Control. Control. We're out of control. 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 Right now, our nation's blood donations have been plummeting because people are afraid to go to blood banks. If you've ever considered donating blood, get out there and do it. You can seriously save somebody's life by sitting in a chair for an hour. Give blood. There's a link in the description where you can search for the nearest blood bank near you. Hey guys, if you learned something new about America or what it's like to live in America, great. You should think about subscribing and turning on your notifications. You can also now buy my songs on iTunes and other formats. Click the link in the description. While we all might have different views, we should all be nice to each other and try to make the US a better place in a positive way.